So sort of starting off with housing and accommodation, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but a lot of our students move into the Egham and Englefield area after their first year of study, and very quickly find that the housing market in these areas is quite expensive. And obviously, this isn't just an Egham and Englefield thing. This is a national thing, where students and renters are finding themselves in low quality, expensive, and sometimes exploitative like housing contracts. So we just wanted to know, like, in terms of like, what sort of provisions will you provide? What will you secure for students so that they have better rights as tenants, ensuring that there'll be better quality of housing, and just holding landlords and estate agents to account. So if you have anything to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really big topic, so I'm going to have a lot to say about it. So, forgive me if I have take a bit of time. Firstly, before I come to directly answer your question, I do just want to actually, if I can, just talk about the university and students, because I do feel there's been a bit of a misperception with some of the candidates portraying the situation as a town versus gown situation. I just don't think that's accurate at all. Most residents that I've spoken to, most students that I've spoken to, absolutely acknowledge that there are issues, and I'm sure we will touch on the issues in our conversation today. And that might be issues with the university, that might be issues with the impact of having student housing locally, but I've not remotely picked up on this kind of town versus gown attitude, either amongst the residents or students themselves. And so actually, I do think we need to call that out, actually, because we do want students to feel welcome. We want students to be able to thrive in the community, and we want the university to be a success and be able to thrive. But, we need to make sure that's not at the expense of local residents, but actually working in partnership with. So I will come to answer your question directly now. I did just want to make that point, because I just don't think that narrative is accurate at all, and I don't think it's fair. So housing. So I think there's a few points, if I may. So firstly, if we look at the private rented market, that is specifically geared towards towards student accommodation. So that tends to be landlord owned, estate agents run them and manage them for them. At the moment, where I don't think there is enough of the regulation that is already available, so it doesn't require any new legislation, is around HMO licensing and around landlord licensing. Now, both of those I've had responsibility for bringing in my own authority, when I was the cabinet member in charge of that. And they deal with two slightly separate but complementary issues. So HMO licensing is specifically around, as I'm sure you know, so houses in multiple occupancy, which student accommodation is. That is more focused on around the safety and the security of the house itself. So making sure that the minimum space standards are being met, making sure that things that could have an impact on things like fire safety and quality of the actual home is being met. And there is a licensing scheme in place. As I say, we don't need any new legislation for that could be brought in and expanded locally now. I'm already working with the Labour councillors in Englefield Green, and I understand that them, alongside some of the independent councillors there, have already started looking at this, and if elected, I will be working to support them on that, including where it can be expanded, because as I say, I've got experience before, I've done it before, and it's had the impact that we wanted it to have in terms of really driving up the standards of that sector. There is then the option of looking at landlord licensing, and this is a separate thing which complements HMO licensing, but this is more around the individual who is actually the landlord, because there are some unscrupulous there are some very good landlords, but there are some unscrupulous landlords who do frankly exploit the situation, particularly when it comes to student housing, because actually most students want to live in close proximity to the university, where they feel part of that student community alongside the local community. So landlord licensing is really around really encouraging fit and proper landlord behaviour. And again, I've had experience in bringing that in. We've seen it work, and when I say we've seen it work, it actually means that may mean taking some landlords out of the market. But you know what? If they're the kind of landlords who are exploiting residents, I'm quite happy with that. I'm very comfortable with them no longer being able to put students or anybody in that kind of situation. So that's kind of, I would say, the licensing with the existing stuff. then what would we do differently? So firstly, we need to build more homes, and I include student accommodation in that. What students need to be able to do is have the choice. I don't want students to be forced to have to live in student accommodation, but I also don't want them to be forced to have to live in HMOs if they don't want to. So making sure that the choice of that is expanded to them, it is key, and we are simply going to need to build more homes of all tenures to achieve that. You would have seen maybe today there's been quite a few announcements about the private rented sector today, which I'm sure you may have seen, because that's been a focus of the party's campaign today. But things like, for example, abolishing Section 21, no fault evictions, I think is really key. That is a massive, massive issue around that causes homelessness. Bringing in a private renters charter, so making sure that if you are in a rental property, that you are in the same kind of standards as you would be in a council-owned accommodation. So basically, again, if I'm talking about something that you're not familiar with, please let me know and I will explain. But council housing went through what was called the Decent Home Standard under the last Labour government, really bringing it up to a minimum standard. The Renters Charter and the proposal today looks to bring the private rented sector similarly up to that standard. It is also looking at measures of so energy efficiency, really to help people save bills. So again, giving landlords until 2030. So, you know, we're not being unreasonable in the time frame we're giving them. We're giving them until 2030 to reach EPC. So that's Energy Performance Certificate level C. So really improving the efficiency, the insulation, and therefore the cost to students and any renters of being able to warm their homes.
Thank you so much. I think that was really, really really insightful, and I think really reassuring to hear, particularly like the things around like energy performance certificate levels and things like that. I mean, I know like myself and Hannah, just as students, but also as people that live in the Egham area, you know, living in low quality housing that isn't energy efficient and then paying like extortionate energy bills is not really something that students can support. And we'll sort of get on into stuff about like maintenance and money and things like that later. But yeah, and I think it's really, really reassuring to see that like you're willing to sort of like crack down on, you know, insufficient and like unproper standards of housing as well. I think, you know, having those difficult conversations, holding people to account when they're not providing like safe and like suitable standards for people to live in. But yeah, thank you so much. That was really, really helpful.
That's okay. And I just want to make that point, because an argument people often say around this, oh, it will drive landlords out of the industry. Well, actually, if you're a landlord that's not willing to meet those safe standards, you shouldn't be a landlord. The vast majority of them, and trust me, as I say, I've got experience doing this and I have implemented it. The vast majority of landlords are absolutely willing to do what it takes to do this, because they are responsible and they do care about their tenants. So, you know, for those that it may drive out of the sector, well, frankly, they shouldn't be in the sector in the first place.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think also the fact that like you've had experience with having done this in the past, sort of shows that like this is something that you can bring in should you be elected in the future as well. But yeah, thank you for your answer on housing and accommodation. We'll sort of do a bit of a natural segue into sort of funding and fees. And as I'm sure you're aware, like there has been a national rise in costs, which significantly impacts people, but particularly like students, with students picking up part-time employment to support their studies, and just for basic necessities like food and rent and things like that. So this sort of ties into like accessible education, and you know, bringing. Sorry, I've just completely lost my train of thought. But yeah, so what we're sort of asking for, and like what we're sort of want to hear your thoughts about, is about either lowering or eliminating student fees, and ensuring that maintenance loans are actually rising in line with inflation. Because I think we're looking at maintenance loans still being stuck at like 2020, 2021, and like it hasn't risen in line with inflation since then. So we sort of want to know about what your commitment is to making sure that we see that reflective like maintenance loan increase, and also a solution to the funding pressures felt by UK higher education providers. I'm sure you're aware of how UK universities are kind of struggling for funding at the moment. But yeah, so just like to sort of summarize, what are your thoughts on lowering and eliminating student fees, or increasing maintenance loans annually in line with inflation? And do you have any sort of solution for the funding model and pressures felt by UK universities?
Yeah, I'll take student fees first, and I'm going to be really direct with you. I'm someone who believes in honesty. So actually, even if it's something that it may not be what you want to hear, I would much rather be honest with you about that, and rather than try to pander to what I would think that your particular view might be. We are not proposing to get rid of student fees. And I think we just need to be upfront about that. Not only in terms of the what it would cost the economy, and we are really clear going into this election that we cannot have unfunded spending commitments. If we look at what's happened over the last 14 years, but actually particularly the last few years, all the other things that you were talking about the impact of cost of students, of rent, of heating, of food, that would just be further exasperated if we were to make these kind of unfunded spending commitments. So I want to be upfront with you on that. What I do say, and you touched on it around a wider university funding model, we do absolutely acknowledge, though, that the current funding model for universities, it's broken. It's actually not working for anybody. So it doesn't matter who you are in this kind of agreement, whether you're a student, whether you're the university yourself, or whether you're the taxpayer, it's actually not working at all. So one of the things that, if we are elected, what we will be doing, and what I certainly would be supporting, is an early review of that education, or higher education funding model, because at the moment, as I said, it's not working. It's not actually delivering the kind of outcomes we want to see. And so what it does, it kind of creates a knock-on impact for universities to increasingly have to increase the number of overseas students, for example, that they have on the books, because that is a way to increase the funding that they're receiving. They will have all these knock-on impacts that haven't necessarily been thought through. So having that early review will be key. A second part is those universities that undertake R&D, so research and development projects. So at the moment, a lot of these funding cycles, because the funding will come from central government around some of these R&D projects and R&D streams, a lot of those funding models at the moment are very short term. So it doesn't give any long-term stability to the university to know that they have the funds to fund it. And with it being short term, it also means that they're having to spend time, staff time, and often money to have to bid for these kind of funding models. So what we have proposed to do is that we would basically scrap the current model of funding for research and development at universities and launch instead a 10-year funding cycle, so that when universities get that, they know and they have that securely, and they can have that stability of having that funding for that particular research project for 10 years. And it also significantly limits the cost and the time it takes to have to constantly rebid for small pots of money.
I always mute myself and get to unmute myself, and I'm just like scrambling
That's
for the
okay.
unmute button. Thank you. That was really, really insightful. I think for us, just a big thing is like cost of living is something that is really, really affecting students, and the fact that like maintenance loans haven't rise in line with inflation. I think the government's own figures said that like the maintenance loan would have to increase by 15.5% to maintain the value of support in real terms. Like what is that solution? Like, what is the solution for students to be able to access education and make sure that they're thriving? Because a lot of students are spending more time working part-time jobs than they do on their actual degree. I think there's a report by HEPI, which instead of talking about it as a cost of living, it's a cost of learning. You spend more time trying to support yourself than you do learning. And how does that make higher education accessible? I mean, is there any sort of solution or any sort of commitment that you can have to making it more accessible for people?
Yeah, look, I'll be honest, I don't know if the party has got a policy on the rising of maintenance loans, maintenance grants in line with inflation. If you're happy to, I can go away and find that out, and I can come back to you with an answer on that. But one thing I would say is, at the moment, the costs that are borne on students are also rising elsewhere. We touched on rental costs, we've touched on housing costs, we've touched on energy costs, and all of these are exasperated by the current cost of living situation. When we've seen inflation being as high as 11%, and even today, the Bank of England, whilst we might have seen inflation drop to 2%, interest rates are still being kept at 5.75%. that has an impact on the costs that you are liable to as students. So actually, the biggest and best thing that a future government could do, and I do hope it's a Labour government, of course, you would expect me to say that, but no, in all seriousness, we need to address the fundamental issues of stability and growth in our economy, because without that, all of these other things that are putting cost pressures on yourselves, that pressure is not going to be alleviated, and that's only going to exacerbate the situation of having to work more to pay the rising costs. So we do need to address those fundamental issues to help start to bring costs down.
Okay, thank you. That was really helpful. But yeah, so I guess like for you and for like the Labour Party, it's more of a focus on like the issues that surround students, so like making sure that they can rent houses affordably and making sure that they stabilize the economy. And you're saying like that in turn should allow students to actually be able to afford those things, and so they won't have to be, working such long hours.
Yes. I think in every aspect, we would obviously want to see costs reduced. So let's take energy, for example. So our proposal for Great British Energy would basically see a reduction of, on average, £300 per household per year. Now, that's just one aspect where we would be expected to deliver that saving. Likewise, if you get, so food costs at the moment are going through the roof. I think it's around 20% increase year on year in recent years. Again, if we manage to get the economy growing and keep inflation down, that we would expect that to reduce as well.
Okay, thank you. That was really helpful. I'm gonna hand over.
Really quickly. You may have seen probably the biggest impact for students actually who are working. We are proposing to remove any age bands in regards to the minimum wage. So you may be aware that at the moment, adults, you can be an adult, but depending on your age, if you are at the younger end of the scale, you can be paid a lower minimum wage. We're proposing to get rid of that entirely. So bringing anyone who is on that current lower rate, which would cover a lot of students actually, we're immediately uprating them to what is the standard minimum wage.
I think that's really, really reassuring, especially like considering a lot of students now are like either carers for their own families. They oftentimes have to support their own families. So I think, making sure there's a sort of standard, like universal minimum wage for like all ages, I think that would be something that would be really appreciated by students. So yeah, thank you. I'm just going to be mindful of time and ensure that we sort of get through.
I'll try and not talk so much.
No, it's not you. Don't worry. But I'll hand over to Hannah. Who'll talk about the LGBT community.
Yeah, I know. Just kind of going back on just like your questions you just said. Really appreciate the transparency. That is good to hear. My next kind of like area that I'm kind of going to ask about is around the LGBT plus community. So in recent years, our students across the country have consistently raised about like how it feels that the UK is becoming an increasingly hostile environment for queer students, with current government ministers, shadow ministers, and even the current prime minister making comments and policies that are harmful to the LGBT plus community. So if you're elected, how will you stand up for the LGBT plus community, so secure better support for trans students, and make the area and the country safer for the community?
Let me start by saying I'm a very proud ally of the LGBTQI plus community. I have absolutely no bones to say about that. One thing I'm really sad about the timing of this election is I usually get to march in London Pride as part of the procession, and it's honestly one of the best days ever in the year. For obvious reasons, I'm not able to do that this year, so I'm very, very sad about that. Look, I actually agree, because I think there's been a level of this kind of there's been a level of victimizing actually some of the most vulnerable in our society, and for me, it's for purely political reasons, as we've seen the governing party, and unfortunately is, I would say, driven by the governing party at the moment, as they've kind of lurched more and more to the right. Actually, they are looking to blame the other, and I cannot stand that. To think the Conservative Party have gone from the party that only 10 years ago was the party that brought in marriage equality to where they are now. Frankly, that just shows how far they have fallen. So I'm very proud in my support for the LGBTQ plus community, and if elected, that will just continue. That is not something that is I'm trying to think of a way to describe this. That's not something that is a political position of mine. That is a moral principle of mine, and that's as far as that's what I can say. In terms of some practical changes, because as much as we have made some progress, there is always more to do. So in terms of some practical changes, if elected, the Labour Party will be making any anti-LGBTQ plus hate crime an aggravated offence, which it isn't currently. So we have unfortunately seen a significant increase in these type of crimes, and at the moment it's not an aggravated offence, which does mean that the penalties are lesser, and we do need to make sure that is taken seriously. We will continue to work. We fully support the Terence Higgins Trust campaign, which you might be aware of, which is to eradicate HIV by 2030. We're in full support of that. And there was a third, and I can't remember. It's just completely gone out of my mind. But yeah.
No,
Oh, sorry. I've remembered now. Sorry,
Okay.
I have remembered now. And that is banning conversion therapy, and that includes the anti-trans conversion therapy, because that is frankly, that is abuse. And I want to be clear. So we will legislate to ban that in all of its guises.
That's really positive and promising to hear. Such a shame that you don't get to walk in Pride this year, though.
I'm really upset about it, so let's not talk about it. Genuinely, it's always usually one of the best days of the year. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it is honestly amazing. I worked backstage 1 year, and it was great. Like, it was really lovely.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, I'm going to move swiftly on, just because of time, onto our kind of next area, which is around kind of like support and mental health. So, mental health issues are prevalent, highly prevalent amongst students, and mental health conditions reported by students are like 7 times higher than what they were 10 years ago. So kind of in light of this crisis, do you think enough is being done in mental health and wellbeing services, particularly in education? And do you think the government should be doing more to be able to support and enable universities to help better support their students' well-being?
Yeah, look, I'm also conscious of time, because I could honestly speak about this for an hour. So I will try and keep it relatively brief. If we look at what's happened currently, so at the moment, our health service, and that includes our mental health service, has been completely starved. Has been completely starved of the funding it requires. So if you look, for example, and I'm going to go slightly younger than university students, and I'll explain why in a minute. If you're 15, 16 and you have a referral to CAMS at the moment in this area, it can take up to 2 years before you are seen. 2 years before you are seen by a mental health specialist. Now, what that means is we are increasingly seeing people start university when a referral has been made 2.5 years ago, when they were 15, 16, still not having the support in place. Starting university is stressful anyway, so it often exasperates that situation. So we have just not had the level of investment, and I personally believe that we need to be front loading that to actually much younger ages. I met with a youth social worker a couple of days ago, who, I mean, honestly, the thing she was telling me about what she was experiencing from children as young as 6, 7, 8, 9, we're talking about, it was heartbreaking, frankly. So yes, so I think that's what the current situation has been. Then what are we going to do about it? So we have a proposal to have a mental health support server in every single school, and I think that is important, so that there's no longer that significant delay between requesting help and that help being provided, and actually just embedding it into part of the normal practice. Because we talk about mental health, but we should also be referring to mental well-being. It is not just those who are having a mental health crisis that require mental well-being, so that support package and that support person will be there for everybody to access. Then that's it within schools, so that is within the education sector. Then wider, we are proposing to have a network of youth hubs across the country, so one in every community, and that will work with adults up to the age of 25 in some cases. Now, they will have specialist youth workers. They will also have mental health support workers, because actually there will be some occasions and some circumstances where you do need to have that kind of partnership working to be able to really deliver positive outcomes for the individual involved. I will then just come on to universities, if I may. I personally, I think unions such as yourselves often tend to do quite a lot of good work in this sphere, because I think you live it and you've experienced it and you understand the impact it will have. I personally feel that some universities could do more. The universities could do more to support the of what is often kind of the unions at the student union at the forefront of this. So I would absolutely be advocating, and if elected, working with the university to see what additional resource they could provide and what additional capacity they could provide in this sphere, because it shouldn't have to be picked up entirely by the student union, and it shouldn't have to be picked up entirely by staff who have a million other things that they need to be doing.
Just sort of on that, do you feel like universities owe a duty of care to those students, they're responsible for them for 3 years? Is that something that you believe in?
Do universities owe a duty of care to their students? Without a shadow of a doubt. Yes.
Thank you. Do you want to come in and add anything to that?
No, sorry, the feedback.
Oh, sorry.
The joys of sharing an office. No, that it was good to hear. And I was kind of like, going on from that, we were just going to ask a little bit about local community. So I know you touched at the start about students and the community, but we kind of had questions around commitments to safety through the implementations of night buses in Englefield and kind of investment into street lighting, but also when it comes to council tax, so removing council tax for students when remaining in contracts for a short periods of time, or for part-time students as well, and what you would be pledging towards the community that would also be supporting our students here as well.
So I'll come on to safety first. I fully support and would work, if elected, the reintroduction of night buses in Englefield Green. I think that's actually a really important issue. Just to give you an explain reason why. So some of the issues that residents have raised with me, and as I said, actually they were at pains to make the point that they are not anti-student. They were actually, in some cases, I would say, a bit critical of the university for having taken away some of the infrastructure that was in place. But is to be disturbed late at night when students are walking past after a night out. Now, I can understand why they might feel like that. I also understand, if there is no other option, how are students meant to get home? So it's not just about safety and security. It is also about, in some cases, being a good neighbour, which I know both parts of the community want to do. Lighting is a really, really important one. You can walk through parts of Englefield Green at night. We've been quite lucky because we're in the middle of summer right now, but actually in other parts of the year, it can feel quite dark and quite dangerous, and we do need to make sure that lighting is improved. I would also raise the issue around access points as well. Where are the relevant access points into the university? I know there's a big issue around the back gate of the university, and basically because obviously that would provide much easier access for some students, and we do need to make sure that if and when that is able to be reopened, making sure that remains safe as well. So there are all of these things that are in the mix, but I think ultimately, and it kind of touches on your question earlier around a duty of care. Often, and I know not always, but often students have gone straight from their family homes with their parents straight into university. So, yes, of course, the university has that duty of care. They are not just educating them in their subjects. That part of that education is also moving into adult life, quite frankly. And so making things like the safety, the security, and things like this are vitally important. I also think that goes beyond some of the physical infrastructure we're talking about here. So like buses, like street lights. Actually, it's also about the environment on campus, the behaviour of other students. Jokes being shared on WhatsApp and how far that gets around. Is it a safe situation? We touched on trans students. That's important. What about female students as well? If there's this kind of misogynistic banter that is going around, and found out, actually, what is the university doing to step in and address that?
Yeah, no, that's helpful to hear. And kind of sorry, just going back to regarding council tax and students, kind of what's your, I don't know, what do you think of that?
Okay, and again, I'll be really honest with you. So, firstly, I don't, of course, I support students not having to pay council tax when they're in university. Of course, I do. Um, I have a slightly different view about when they save longer term, because those services are still being provided, and local councils have been completely starved of money. So, whilst effectively they are subsidising students during term time, which I agree that they should do. There's no issue around that. I think if the choice is made to say beyond that, I think it would be difficult to justify an extension of that council tax exemption personally. And I say that sitting here as someone who's been a councillor for 14 years, so has seen what has happened to local government finance in that time. And without wanting to be too blunt about it, but a decision like this could be the difference between keeping a library open or not. It could be the difference between whether we can run a bus service or not. And this is the kind of decisions that are having to be taken in local government all the time.
I appreciate the honesty around that. I'm now going to pass over to Sharania for our last kind of question, which around like access to education. So Sharania.
Yes, thank you. I feel like we sort of touched on a lot of the topics that surround this. So, like affordability of housing, mental health, well-being, things like that. And students care very much about appropriate and accessible ways into accessing higher education and accessing university degree. It's a really key part of unlocking like your potential for future career prospects. And it's really important that we're sort of breaking down those barriers into sort of getting that opportunity. What are your thoughts on sort of introducing more alternative pathways to university? And what is sort of the commitment you're able to provide in terms of making sure a university degree is accessible as possible?
Yeah, I think we should. I will come specifically to university, but I do just want to make the point that for some people, other routes of education are just as applicable and just as valid. So whether that's through an apprenticeship course, whether that's through technical training, it needs to be down to individual choice around what type of education and what type of employment they wish to go to, but each is as valid as the other. That said, I want every person who wants to be able to go to university to be able to do so. And I do not want some of the factors that are ordinarily issues, so such as their personal financial situation, such as where they might come from, where they might have grown up, such as their race, such as their ethnicity. I do not want these things to be a hindrance to anybody who wants to go to be able to go. Now, some of those pathways into university, I frankly think we need to start thinking about much earlier, because that kind of inequality in education doesn't begin at age 16, when people might start to think about which university they're going to or where they're going. That kind of inequality is built in from the very, very first entry point into education. So we need to be making sure we are levelling the playing field really from nursery upward, not looking at it from at the point of university downward. So that would involve things like, so again, you may have seen some of the our proposals around this. So expanding nursery education by bringing 3,000 additional nurseries nationwide, free breakfast clubs at primary schools. And that is not just about the food aspect. Actually, study after study after study shows that providing this actually achieves greater educational attainment for children who are on that scheme already. Making sure that we have, so we are looking at reforming what was previously the apprenticeship levy. So making sure that so it no longer has to be purely down the route that the current apprenticeship levy is focused on. We're looking to reform that into a wider skills and growth levy, which can be used to fund alternative methods of skills, training, education and employment that can ultimately also be a route into higher education. So I think it's a myriad of all of these things. But I am sorry to sound like a broken record, because it all needs to be underpinned by that central plank, which is the economy. We want to achieve all of these things. We want to make sure that work pays for parents who are probably saving to send their children to university. If we do not get that central thing right, we will not be able to deliver what our ambition is. And that's why I make no apology about being very crystal clear that actually we need growth back into our economy, and we need the investment it takes to do that, because we cannot invest in public services the way in which we want to if that growth isn't achieved. We cannot deliver the kind of innovation and reform in our, whether that's through you know, our climate change proposals, whether that's through our education, none of that can be delivered if we do not have the growth.
I really do like resonate with that, especially like as someone who's the first person to go to university from my family. A lot of it is about sort of like that grassroots, like starting from those younger years and sort of bringing that like making sure they have the potential and like nurturing that potential right from the beginning. And as you mentioned, it's like that golden thread of building the economy back to where it needs to be, so that all those other elements don't act as like a deterrent from people wanting to access higher education. So really like really reassuring to hear that from you, and thank you so much for
And I will
talking
just
about
make the
that.
point that education doesn't end at university either. So actually, we do need to make sure, whether you've gone to university or not, but once you enter the workplace, that it does have the opportunity for continual professional development, whatever workplace you're in, that continual learning, and making and probably more important, actually, if you haven't been to university, just because you didn't get to university when you were 18 does not mean that you cannot benefit from higher education in adult services. And so making sure that opportunity is there as well is also important.
Sorry, I'm forgetting to unmute myself. No, 100%. And you know, like it, you know, you don't, as you mentioned, like people don't just go to university or think about furthering their education at 18. They do that after they've gone out into the workplace and then decided, oh, I actually want to go back to study. So I think it's really like reassuring to hear like you're thinking about not just the 18-year-old, but also people that are later on in life and want to think about going into education. And I think, you know, that really is just that part about making sure it's accessible for everyone. But yeah, I think that's sort of like it from us in terms of questions. I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to ask us about anything to do with students.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually meeting the university next week. I suppose, and you don't have to do it on the right now if you don't want to. I suppose, basically, just an open invitation that if there is anything that you would like me to be raising with them, or getting, you know, if there's any concerns that you have that you would like me to be formally raising with them, you know, please do make sure, please get in touch with me. You've got my email address. Let me know, because actually I don't know how much engagement you have had with your local MPs previously, but actually what the role of the MP should be is being that conduit and resolving any issues. And if elected, I am determined to be that person, not only with members of the community, as in local residents, but also with students like yourselves as well.
Thank you. We'll be sure to send you an email if we can think of anything. But yeah, I think that's it from us. Thank you so much for your time, and just
That's okay.
You know,
thank you for taking the time as well, and for reaching out. It was great to talk to you, and like I said, I'm really genuinely, I'm really concerned at some of the narrative that has been used by some other candidates around the kind of adversarial nature between students and the community, when that is just not what I think is accurate. And so I wanted to, I'm grateful that you reached out, because I wanted to be able to have the opportunity to make that clear.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely sort of, you know, I feel like that narrative can be quite harmful sometimes. So thank you for pointing that out. And yeah, again, thank you so much for like all your comments and your thoughts on what we've discussed. And it's really been like a really helpful and insightful, I think, fruitful conversation as well. So yeah, I don't know if you have anything else to add, Hannah.
All right, well, listen, the other thing I'm going to say to you, your students who are still there on the 4th of July, is vote. Of course, I would love you to vote for me, but actually the more important thing is that you vote full stop. So yeah, just make sure you vote.
Thank you very much. And we will vote. So
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you, and best
All right.
of luck.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.